Video is talking about how we do GIFs in Photopea. So if you've worked in Photoshop before, you'll have a vague idea maybe of how to do GIFs. I have got a video on the channel specifically about creating GIFs in Photoshop, and at the end of the day the technique is relatively similar. It's just that some of the buttons are in the different places and there's a slightly different way of setting it up. When you're creating GIFs, there's a multitude of things you can do. So you can do little animated GIFs of sort of like photo edits or using imagery. You could do GIFs with sort of like hand-drawn frames that you then photograph and put on. Now what I'm going to show you is a way to do sort of like an animated logo. So what I've done is I've made my logo. Now I've made this in Gravit. You might make a logo or an icon or some sort of digital piece in Illustrator instead, but it's essentially the same process. Now what I want to do is export this so that it's an image file so that I can work with it in Photopea. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a new document and I'm going to just set it to 500 pixels. And I'm going to make it square, just for ease. 500 pixels and create. Now I want this to be transparent because I'm going to export it as a PNG. So when you're in Gravit, you can just take the opacity down up here and that gives you that checkerboard which lets us know that it's transparent. Now because I've got my other design in here, I'm going to find it, copy it, go to my other new page and paste it on there. Now sometimes it'll paste it sort of randomly off the edge of the page, but that's fine. You can just zoom out to figure out where it is. And I'm going to hold shift so that when I scale it down, it's all in proportion. Now it looks a little bit weird at the moment, but don't worry about that. So that's my little design that I want to use. I'm going to go to File, Export, PNG. So nice and simple. Now what that does is it gives me that with no background on. It's really important if you're doing anything with logos or icons or even potentially little illustrations that you've made, you don't want an added background on your PNG. PNGs are transparent and that's the best way to have this really, because it just gives you a bit more control. So that should go into my downloads now, so I can show you my downloads. There it is, so it's there, and if I open that, it has a slightly grey background. It means we've got nothing on there, so that tells me that it's definitely see-through, which is what we want. So now I'm in Photopea. Now I'm actually just going to open a new document in Photopea so that I can show you how I've got to that point. So all you need to do is just Google search for Photopea, then we can do open from computer. And all I'm going to do is find that because we've already set the size of this, so we don't need to worry about anything else. So I'm going to upload that and then it drops it on there perfectly for us. Now, the way to do GIFs is to make frames. So if you were making like a stop motion, if you think about flip books that you might have done at school, each piece of paper was a frame, so a frame of animations. That's a part of the animation. And GIFs in Photoshop or in Photopea work in frames. And now this is a bit of an arduous process, but basically what you need to do is to copy that layer. So the easiest way to do that is to drag it down to the new layer icon and it duplicates it. So you can see I've got two of them now. Now I want to leave this in the same page. So I want to leave it where it is. And actually what the first thing I'm going to do is hide my other one in the background. Now a really simple thing that you can do in terms of GIFs is something that changes colour. So I'll show you just how to do that really quick. So we'll do image adjustments, hue saturation. I'll move this out of the way so you can see, and I'm going to take that up by 20. So you can see we're starting to change the colour of that. And click OK. Now, if I hide that, you can see the colour has changed ever so slightly. Now, the important thing with doing GIFs in Photoshop is if you want sort of a smooth transition, so you want it to like fade or move in a natural way, so I want the colours to change in a very smooth rather than jaggedy, then you need to do it in small amounts, so small amounts each time. So I'm going to double click this, I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, Hue Saturation, and I'm going to take it up another 20. And then I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to go through that process multiple times. And you can see as I do it, each time it's getting more and more, the colour is changing more. So if I sort of go through and hide, you can see that process is quite gradual, which is what we want. And you just go through that process. Now, you can do, obviously you don't have to change the colour. You could play around with filters. So you could play around with like a distort filter or a noise filter or a pixelate filter. And you could change the, so if I do like a Gaussian blur or something, I could blur it slightly. So I could do sort of like a 0.5, copy and paste it, do a 1, then do a 1.5, copy and paste it, so it would blur gradually. So you'd see that sort of gradual process of it blurring. And the important thing is that they're all on separate layers, so each frame is its own layer. Now I'm going to show you one that I did earlier. Now you can see here I've got quite a few. So if I go through and hide these, we've gone through quite a few layers. Now all I've done, you can see these have got an A in front of them. When you compare it to my other document, there's no A in front of them. Now that means they are animation frames. So all I've done is once I've got to the point where I'm happy, so I'm happy with those, they're all in the right order, I'm going to select them all. So I just held Shift on my keyboard to select them all. I've gone to Layer, Animation, Make Frames, and that puts that A in front of them. Now I've left my background out because I've got that layer hidden anyway. So if there's any layers that you don't want included in your animation, make sure you don't select them and you don't want that A in front of them. So it's really important that that A is there. Now all I'm going to do, so the hardest bit is done, is I'm going to go to File, Export as GIF. Now this lets me see what I've got. So you can see I've got my transparent background in there and it's changing colour. Now if I untick Boomerang, you can see it sort of like stops and restarts and goes back to the beginning. Now, if you know Instagram and TikTok and things, Boomerang means it sort of goes like backwards and forwards. So it goes forwards and then backwards and then forwards and then backwards. So this sort of puts it on a repeat. Now, if I wanted it to go the opposite way, so if it was changing colour in the wrong direction, I could reverse the frames. So it could go from the greeny colour to the bluey colour and then back. It doesn't really make much difference in this case, but in some others it will. So I've also got control here of the speed. So if I think that's not smooth enough, I can speed it up. So I could take it to 150 and then it'll be a lot faster, but the faster it is, the smoother it is. If I was really concerned about the smoothness, but I didn't want it faster, I could go back and add more frames in between to add more steps. So I did it, 20 at a time. I could do it 10 at a time. But it's really, you can change the frames and the speed there. So you sort of get it either very glitchy. So you can see it's very sort of like glitchy there compared to a lot smoother here. And obviously that's setting my eyes a bit crazy. So nice and simple, just changing the hue and saturations, just changing the colour of your logo. Slightly more complicated is this one, where it gets bigger and then smaller. Now you can see if I click reverse frames, it goes from big to small and then small to big. So it's better for me if it goes from small to big, so it looks like it's popping onto the page. And again, we've got the boomerang on there, otherwise it would just do that and then go big and small, which is a bit horrible. So I quite like it when it goes back and forth. Again, if I slow that down, you can see it almost like jumps between the steps, which obviously is horrible. And you can see clearly how it's been made then, is we've just made it smaller and smaller. So just making sure you've got a speed that you're happy with. You'll also notice that it stops and then goes down. It stops and then goes down. So what I've done is I've put some extra frames in at the end so that the final logo at full size is just on show for a little bit longer. So I've just copied and pasted those. So if I go through my layers now and sort of show you, you'll be able to see how I've done that. So I've got my original layer here. I've got quite a few of these just because I wanted it to stay on screen a little bit longer. So the more there are, the longer it'll be on screen. Then you can see my next one down is just slightly smaller. And all I've done is I've duplicated this layer. So this is my original. Duplicated it, selected it, and then I've held Alt. So Alt and Shift allows me to keep it in scale, and it allows me to keep it in the center of my page. So you can see if I didn't hold Alt, if I didn't hold Shift, I can go all over the place. If I hold Shift but I don't hold Alt, it goes like that. So it goes down to one corner, which is not what I wanted. So I'm clicking the corner, I'm holding Shift and Alt, which means it gets smaller in proportion and it goes into the center. So it's nice and even when it goes smaller, so it goes into the middle. Now all I've done is I've looked at my sort of, so when I click up here, you can see I've got my width and my height, and I've gone, okay, well I'm going to go down sort of like 20 pixels at a time. So I'm going to go from 510 to 490, save it, and carry on. And you can see as you go through, they get smaller and smaller and smaller. Now obviously you only see one frame at a time, and you can see when you do the animation, otherwise it would look like that, which is horrible. So it's really important that you've got a plan in your head and you understand how to do that on a frame. That'll make a bit more sense when I talk to you in a minute about the next one. But changing the size really easy, so it makes it pop up and then disappear again. You could combine changing the size and changing the rotation. So for example, if I go to my layer here. So that's that layer. If I look at the layer underneath, it gets slightly smaller. I could also rotate that. So I could find this layer, I could just click my corner, and then you can see up here, this is actually my rotation. So if I typed in there 20 degrees, it rotates it by 20 degrees. Now what I could then do is find that one, same thing, and rotate it by 40 degrees, and you can see it rotates it by 40 degrees. The same thing here, find my next one down, click my corner, rotate it by 60 degrees. Now it's not going to rotate it very far, so you could always do increments of 40 or increments of 45, depending on how fast you want it to spin. So if you think about 360 degrees as a full turn, you might need to consider how that's going to look. Now I just want to check, so I've duplicated that one, so that one needs to go to 90 actually, so I'm going to do another, let's go to 80, there we go. And then the same again, so this one's going to go to 100. So each time you're changing a value of some kind, so whether it's the size, whether it's the rotation, whether it's the colour, but on each frame you're changing something about that piece, and you're changing it gradually, so you're doing it in small steps. So you can see I'm doing sort of 20 degrees or 20 pixels in size, or 20 in hue saturation, so I'm doing small steps. That's really key to getting it to look smooth, to get it to look natural. And you can do this with anything. So you could do this with lots of other effects. You could do this with a combination of size and rotation. You could move it across the page. So you could start in the top corner and then it could come down. It's totally up to you. I find it a lot easier to do things that are sort of in the same place. I find it a lot easier in terms of how I'm thinking in order to get things where I want them to be. But you could have it move across the page. You could have it sort of like jump across the page, so put it in different places each time. But obviously you have to remember that each frame is only on the screen for a very short amount of time. So really what you've got to figure out is, do I duplicate frames? Do I do like 3 frames per position or something like that so that it sits in one place? Do I do frames in between where I move it slightly each time so that it looks like it's moving very naturally, very smoothly? Again, it's totally up to you how you want to do that, but you need to almost sort of like plan that out in advance. And it's a lot easier just to plan it thoroughly and then go for it and make it. If you try and sort of like make it and plan it as you go, you'll make loads of mistakes and you'll find it really hard and you'll actually just end up redoing stuff, which is obviously the worst thing. Okay, did I get that right? Is that one 240? Okay, so if I go to File, Export as GIF now, you should see that it spins as well. So not only does it get bigger, but it spins, and then it spins backwards. It spins. So again, I might need to consider my speed. I might need to put more frames in there. I've obviously got some frames at the end so that it sort of sits on the screen for a little bit before it disappears again. But they would combine 2 effects. You could obviously combine like a colour change. You could have a colour background that changes colour rather than the logo or something like that. You could have a shape behind it that rotates or moves or gets bigger or smaller, but loads of different things you can do. So anything that you can sort of think of, you can do, as long as you do it in small steps and you keep them all on their own layers. And then once you've got your layers, you can select them all, go to Layer, Animation, Make Frames, and then you're ready to export and see what it looks like. Using this sort of like export GIF lets you just preview it, so it lets you just have a look and go, okay, well, is that working or not? So you don't have to export it straight away. You can just use that to have a look at how it's getting on. Now, this one is a little bit more complicated, so I'm just going to show you actually what this one does so that you can get an idea. So if I go to Export as GIF, okay, so I've got my main part of my logo, so my image in the circle, spinning and getting bigger. And then I've got my 2 pieces of text sort of like coming out from the sides. Now the way I've had to do that is separate those pieces out. So I can't do that with one thing. I need separate pieces. So if I sort of show you this layer. So this layer only has my little icon on. So what I've had to do that is find my original logo, which obviously is this top one. And then I've had to go around with my polygonal lasso and zoom in and sort of cut out the bit I want. Now the beauty of this is that we've got a transparent background in there. If you don't have a transparent background, then this is going to be really hard because you're going to have loads of random background in here to do. So that's one of the joys of exporting it with that transparent background. Now what I can do is copy and paste that out. So I can hide that, and then I've just got that bit on its own. So now I can animate that by itself because that's all I need. So I don't have to worry about any other bits. So then I can animate that on its own, which is obviously what we've got at the top here. So I'll just hide that. So that's what's happening here, is we're animating these as we go. So we're changing the scale, changing the rotation, and we're getting it to come up. Then we get to a point where we want the text to appear. So you can see here that the text is starting to appear. Now all I've done there is find the bit of text that I want. So I want my original, and obviously I've named my layers original, so that makes my life a lot easier. And the same thing again, I've gone, okay, well I want this bit, so I'm going to draw around that. Careful not to get any of the other logo in. Copy and paste it out, and then I've got that piece on its own. Now I want that to stay on, so I want that to stay where it is. So I've got to a point here where I want that to be there. Now at this point, what I needed to do was get this layer and change the scale of that layer. So I went from there, copied and pasted it, moved it that way, copied and pasted it, moved it that way, copy and pasted it, moved it that way. And what I'm doing is I'm sort of squishing it so that it almost like stretches out and appears. So I'm just doing it again, sort of like 10 pixels at a time. Now, if I did that, this layer would disappear. So then what I've done is I've gotten my layers of this animation together. So I've copied and pasted those and made them at different scales. And then I've kept a backup of this and I've merged them together once I'm happy. So once I've got to a point where I think, yeah, I'm happy with that, I put them together. So you can see here, I've got the middle bit, and then I've got the middle bit with some text stuck onto it, and that's on the same layer. So what I've done there is I've got my middle bit that I'm happy with, my bit of text that's at the right scale. I've selected them both, layer, merge. Now it is long-winded, so something like this is very complicated. It may only be a few seconds of animation, and I'm only technically doing 3 things: scale and spin, and then the text stretching out. But I've got 3 pieces of logo to animate, and that in itself is a complicated job. I mean, you can see how many layers I've got. It's a long process, so it's really about being thorough and being sort of very particular about things. So then I've merged those together. So layer, merge, and that's one frame. Obviously you need duplicates of these, so I can't duplicate that again and change it because it's now trapped as one layer. So if I undo that, I would always have a duplicate of each so that I can merge one, and then the other piece of text I can scooch down, and then again I'm going to duplicate it before I merge it. Select my original, layer, merge, then I've got my duplicate, so then I can scooch it down. So you can see all I'm changing is the text, but it needs to be attached, and I'm going to duplicate it before I merge it so that I've got my other copy to edit, layer, merge, find my text again, squish it down, duplicate it before I merge it so that I've got a backup copy, layer, merge, and then you can see I'm ready to merge those last 2 basically because I'm ready to go. So if I show you what happens there, we go from that to that to that to that one to the final one. Now what I would then do is duplicate that layer, find my original, cut out this piece of text, and then go through the same process. So I'd cut out my second piece of text so it's on its own layer. I'd have this one as my sort of one that I merge it with each time, and I duplicate them, merge it, duplicate it, merge it, duplicate it, merge it, etc. And then you get to your final altogether logo, and that's how you make it. Now, obviously all of these extra layers that I've just made I don't need. If I go through and do export as GIF now, it doesn't play them because they've not got that A in front. So if you've got extra layers that you don't need, they won't play on the GIF if they haven't got an A in front. So it's really important. So if I'm playing that and I'm like, oh, loads of these layers aren't working, why are they not working? They need that A in front. So I need to select them, do layer, animation, make frames. So it converts them to an animation frame. And then when I do file export, you'll see it's added those onto the end. And then we get that weird like clip bit at the end, which is that just a little bit that I've done. So obviously we don't want that, so I'm going to delete all those layers. But that is the basics of Gifs in Photopea. So it's thinking about your layers that you're making, planning it in advance is super important. If you've not got sort of like a vision in your head of what you want to make, you'll find it really impossible. I find it easiest to sketch it out first or draw it out or just get an idea of like, okay, it needs to do that, that and that first. So if I work backwards, it's going to do that. If you get it in the wrong order and you get it the wrong way around, don't panic. So you can just reverse it. So you can see I can do reverse frames. So I got it in the wrong way first. So it looks like it's disappearing, which is not what I want. So I've reversed it. And then obviously you can set it to boomerang, to loop, and then you can experiment with the speed and see what works best. Once you're happy, obviously you can just click save. It downloads it for you. And then you can pop that on anything. You can pop that on a slide. You can pop that on a document, you can pop it, I think you can upload them to your social media page, but nice and easy. So we've got colour changing, we've got a combination of spinning, rotating, and then some text coming out either side, so something a bit more complicated. We've got the spin and rotate, and you can see how that sort of works. But there are 100 different things that you can do, and you don't have to do it with logos. You could do it with hand-drawn frames, but really, really easy to do in Photopea.